What would you do if the only thing protecting your children from the streets was a house someone left you in gratitude, and now your ex wants to take it away? I stood in court with nothing but the truth on my side, while the man who once vowed to love me had hired the best lawyer money could buy. The courtroom felt like a vacuum, thick with tension and colder than any hospital ward I'd ever worked in. I sat alone, my hands wrapped tightly around my canvas bag, the one with a broken zipper I kept meaning to fix. My palms were damp, not from nerves but from the sheer weight of everything. On the other side of the aisle, my ex-husband Jason leaned uncomfortably beside his pristine attorney, their laughter as quiet as it was cruel. The judge called the case, and just like that, I was standing, not as a nurse, not as a mother, but as a woman fighting to keep her family afloat. The house in question wasn't just real estate. It was peace. It was the first time I ever saw my 4 kids sleep through the night without fear. It was left to me in a will by a patient named Harold who had no one else in the world. I held his hand when no one else would. And in return, he gave me something no one else ever had, a chance. But Jason wanted that house. Claimed Harold died in debt, and that I, as the supposed beneficiary, was liable. His lawyer painted me as a manipulator, some kind of nurse-turned-schemer. I tried to speak plainly, sincerely. The truth should have been enough. But sincerity doesn't wear designer suits or carry exhibit folders with tabs. The judge frowned as she looked over the documents. Due to unresolved questions surrounding the deceased's estate, this hearing is adjourned until further evidence can be presented. I sank back into the hard wooden bench, my body numb. Later that day, the hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsher than ever. I clocked in, slipped into my scrubs, and kept my head down. Nobody said it outright, but I saw the looks. Pity mixed with judgment. And from Dr. Hale, my boss, a man whose smile never reached his eyes, came the final blow. "Maybe it's time to think realistically," he said, barely looking up from his clipboard. "Sell the house. It's not like you'll win." I didn't answer. Not to him. Not to anyone. At night, I watched my children sleep in our tiny apartment, their bodies curled up like commas in 2 small beds. 2 of them, Emma and Lucas, I had adopted from a foster situation that still gave me nightmares. They had suffered enough. And now I was failing to protect them again. Every morning, I dressed wounds and emptied bedpans. Every evening, I studied court filings by the dim kitchen light. Jason, meanwhile, posted vacation photos with his new girlfriend on a yacht. He wanted me broken. Powerless. Easier to forget. I thought about Harold. About the stories he told me by the window overlooking that pond. I owed it to him not to let Jason win. But deep down, something had shifted. Not just fear. Not even rage. It was the terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, everyone was right about me. And then, one rainy afternoon, while pushing a wheelchair across a crosswalk, I heard a voice. "Thank you," he said softly. "Most people just walk by." That was the beginning of everything. But I didn't know it yet. The rain had turned the streets into a film of glass. My shift had ended late again, and I was moving fast, head down, shoulders hunched, when I saw him. A man in a wheelchair, stranded at the edge of a crosswalk, soaked to the bone. Cars kept whizzing by, spraying dirty water. Nobody stopped. Nobody even looked. Except me. Without a second thought, I jogged over, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Mind if I help you across?" He looked up slowly, water dripping from his brow. His eyes, though tired, had a kind of fire in them. I wouldn't mind at all. He wasn't young, maybe mid-40s, but handsome in that weary way some people become after life strips away all pretenses. I wheeled him across slowly, careful not to jostle the chair. When we reached the sidewalk, he chuckled. "Most people pretend not to see me. You're the first one who stopped all day." I shrugged. "I work in a hospital. Ignoring people in need isn't exactly my thing." That made him smile. We talked for a moment beneath the awning of a shuttered bakery. I learned his name was Michael. Once a trauma surgeon. A car accident 3 years ago left him paralyzed from the waist down. Lost my career, my wife, my house, he said with a bitter smile. Not necessarily in that order. I told him I was a nurse. A mother of 4. Fighting for a house that wasn't supposed to be up for debate. We laughed, a little too loudly for strangers, but it felt good, clean, honest. When I finally said goodbye, I didn't expect to see him again. But fate is funny that way. 2 weeks later, I drove my kids out to the inherited house, just to remind myself what I was fighting for. The old wooden gate creaked as we stepped inside, and the kids ran straight for the pond like they were in a dream. The water shimmered. Ducks floated lazily near the reeds. Then I noticed the house next door. Or what was left of it. Burned halfway down, overgrown with weeds. And there, in front of it, was Michael, struggling to prop up a loose will on his chair. We locked eyes at the same moment. You again, he said with a crooked grin. You live here? I asked, startled. Lived. It's complicated. He told me the fire happened last year. No insurance. No family willing to help. He'd been staying in a trailer nearby, trying to figure out what came next. For a moment, we both just stood there, or in his case, sat, and stared at the 2 homes side by side. One barely holding on. The other a symbol of everything that could be saved. That night, as my children lay curled in sleeping bags on the wooden floor of the pond house, I looked out the window and saw Michael sitting quietly on the porch next door, staring into the dark water like he was remembering a life he'd lost. I couldn't help but wonder if Harold knew. That the house he gave me would bring someone else back from the edge, too. I didn't know it yet, but this broken man would become our lifeline. And my ex. He was planning something. Something darker than I could have ever imagined. The house by the pond was quieter than any place we'd lived in for years. The kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, it feels sacred. The children chased frogs through the reeds and skipped stones until dusk. For the first time in a long while, their laughter didn't sound forced. Michael started coming by more often. At first it was just casual, sharing coffee on the porch, helping with minor repairs by giving instructions from his chair. But something changed one evening when I found him fixing a broken screen door with tools I didn't know we had. You could have knocked, I joked. He looked up, sweat on his brow, and said, didn't want to bother you. Just felt like fixing something for once. That hit me in the chest harder than I expected. We were 2 broken things learning how to be useful again. But even in that peace, shadows crept in. One night, after putting the kids to bed, I saw headlights in the distance. A car parked by the old gate. The driver didn't get out, just sat there, engine running. The next morning, the ducks in the pond were gone. By noon, Emma, my youngest, started crying. She said the water smelled wrong. And it did. The clear shimmer had turned murky overnight, like something beneath the surface had been stirred. Michael wheeled closer, eyes narrowing. That's not algae. We called the environmental department. While waiting, I took a water sample using an old jar. Later that evening, the test came back, signs of high chemical content. Not natural. Not accidental. Someone had poisoned the pond. Michael didn't say a word. He just turned his wheelchair around and rolled back toward the burnt house next door. When I followed, I found him staring at a broken window like it had just betrayed him. This was deliberate, he said softly. Somebody wanted to scare you out. I already knew who. Jason hadn't taken the court's delay well. He was losing ground, and patience. This wasn't about the house anymore. This was about control. About punishing me for daring to move on. The realization made my skin crawl. Later that week, I spotted a man lurking near the property line. Tall, weathered face, nervous eyes. When I called out to him, he disappeared into the woods. Michael and I sat on the porch that night in silence. You think he'll come back? I asked. He nodded. He wasn't ready today. Michael's jaw clenched, his voice lower now. But next time, he will be. What we didn't know was that next time would come sooner than we thought. And someone unexpected, would have a change of heart that would change everything. The house creaked differently that night, like it could sense what was coming. Michael insisted on staying up late, wheeling between the back porch and the pond's edge, scanning the woods like a guard dog with tired eyes. I told him he didn't have to. That we were safe for the night. He just shook his head. Something's off. I can feel it. At 2:47 a.m., I heard the noise. Not a loud crash, just a soft rustle, like someone stepping carefully over dry leaves. I jumped from bed and rushed to the window. Michael's flashlight beam was bouncing through the mist, cutting across the yard. Then the beam vanished. I ran barefoot across the grass, calling his name. At the edge of the dock, I saw the tracks, wheelchair marks, ending abruptly. My breath caught in my throat. And then I saw it, Michael's chair, floating upside down in the pond. I dove in without thinking. The water was colder than ice and darker than pitch. My limbs flailed until my hands found fabric, his shirt. I yanked him upward, my lungs burning. When we broke the surface, I screamed for help, even though no one was around. Except someone was. The same man I'd seen lurking days before was standing at the water's edge, frozen, his flashlight pointed down. A duffel bag lay near his feet, unopened. He looked at me, then at Michael, coughing and gasping in my arms. Then he dropped to his knees and pulled us out. Michael lay on the dock, shivering, barely conscious. I turned to the stranger, fists clenched. What were you doing here? He didn't answer right away. Then his voice broke, tired and soaked in guilt. He hired me. Your ex said it'd be easy. Just poison a pond. Maybe light a fire. Nothing with people in it. Why didn't you do it? He stared at my children's drawings taped to the kitchen window. Because I saw the kids. The wheelchair tracks. The laundry drying on the line. This isn't just a house. It's someone's home. Michael let out a weak laugh. About time someone else figured that out. We helped him inside, wrapped in towels, and I started checking his vitals. My hands trembled. That's when the man, his name was Leo, told us everything. How Jason had paid him in cash. How he was supposed to poison the pond again that night, this time with something stronger. How the bag contained flares and oil. And how he couldn't go through with it. As he spoke, I noticed something glinting near the dock, half buried in the mud, caught on Michael's fallen wheelchair. I pulled it out, an old, ornate samovar, tarnished but unmistakably gold-plated. Michael laughed again, coughing. Guess I brought up more than mud. We didn't know it yet, but that relic would become more than a strange coincidence. It would pay for a new beginning. Leo sat at our table, dripping and ashamed, and asked for one thing in return. Help me protect my mom, he said. She's sick. I needed money. But I can help you. I swear. I looked at him, then at Michael, then at my children sleeping peacefully through the chaos. And I nodded. This wasn't over. Not even close. But now, I wasn't alone. The next morning, the air felt different, tense but alive. Michael lay on the couch, his breathing steadier but labored. I wrapped his shoulders in a wool blanket and brought him warm tea, still shaken from the night. He looked at me with something I hadn't seen before, something like hope. Leo, the man who was supposed to destroy us, sat at the kitchen table with a notepad in front of him, scribbling everything he remembered, names, payments, dates, times. He wasn't a good man, not really. But he was a man with a conscience, and that was enough for now. I want to go to the police, I said. My voice trembled, but it was steady where it counted. Leo's eyes flickered. They won't believe a word I say unless I have something solid. You will, I said, reaching for my phone. Because we're going to get it. We crafted a plan. Leo agreed to call Jason's go-between, the same man who handed him the duffel bag, and asked to meet. The goal was simple: record everything. Get him to admit Jason's intentions. Michael set up an old phone with a recording app. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. The meeting took place in a diner 30 miles out, with me and Michael parked across the street in a borrowed van, listening through headphones. My palms were slick the entire time. I could barely breathe. But Leo was good. Calm. Convincing. "I don't want to do anything else to those kids," he said, his voice low. "That place is crawling with them. And the guy in the chair, he nearly drowned. This is too much." The other man laughed. "You think Jason cares?" He said, and I quote, "If she won't give it up, we'll make her wish she never set foot on that pond." We had it. The police weren't easy to convince at first. A nurse, a disabled ex-surgeon, and a repentant mercenary wasn't exactly the cast of a standard criminal complaint. But the recording changed everything. Especially when Leo agreed to testify. And then, a miracle, the same day, my lawyer called. "You're not going to believe this," she said breathlessly. "That receipt Jason submitted? The one showing the patient's so-called debt? Yeah. It's fake. A sloppy forgery. I found the original signature template in a public real estate archive." He cut and pasted it. "We're filing a motion to dismiss the claim entirely." My legs buckled, and I sat down on the front steps, the phone still pressed to my ear. Michael rolled beside me and raised an eyebrow. "What happened?" "We might win," I whispered. He smiled. "Told you. This place has good bones." Later that evening, I returned to the pond. The water was still healing, scared, not ruined. Like me. I watched my kids splash in the shallows, their laughter echoing through the trees. Behind me, the house stood tall. Weathered. Resilient. Jason was about to learn something no lawyer could protect him from. I was done being the quiet one. The courtroom felt warmer this time, not comforting, exactly, but less hostile. Maybe because I wasn't alone. Michael wheeled beside me, clean-shaven and upright in a tailored blazer I'd borrowed from a thrift store upstate. Leo sat behind us with folded hands and a nervous bounce in his knee. And in my bag was everything we needed: the recording, the forged receipt, and a simple, handwritten statement from the dying patient who had left me the house. "I want her to have peace," it read. She gave me that when I had nothing. The judge reviewed the documents for what felt like hours. Jason looked calm at first, until the audio was played. His smirk faltered. When the forgery came up, he turned to whisper to his lawyer, who suddenly seemed less confident. And then the judge spoke. "This court finds no basis for the plaintiff's claim. The will is valid, the debt unsubstantiated. The property legally belongs to the defendant." It was quiet at first. Silent. Then I exhaled, for the first time in what felt like months. I won. The house was mine. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Apparently, word of the forged receipt had leaked. Leo covered his face with a hood and ducked away. I stood there in the sunlight, squinting, Michael beside me. A camera flashed, but I didn't mind. Let the world see what resilience looked like. That evening, I filed the final papers, the divorce I should have filed years ago. When the clerk asked if I wanted to keep my last name, I smiled. No. I'll take my maiden name back. And my life. At home, the children greeted me like a returning hero. I hugged each of them, crying freely now. Not because I was broken, but because we were free. Later, Michael sat on the porch, rolling a small gold object in his hand. The samovar we found in the pond had turned out to be real. Old. Valuable. An antique from the late 1800s. It could cover surgery, he said, barely above a whisper. You're really doing it? I asked, stunned. I want to try. If there's even a chance I could stand again, walk again. I want it. I nodded, tears in my throat. Then I'll help you. We sold the samovar a week later. An anonymous collector wired the funds directly. Between that and what we raised from a small-town fundraiser, organized by the very people who used to whisper behind my back, Michael's operation was scheduled for early fall. We began repairing the house properly. Painting walls, sealing windows, building a garden. Leo stayed, quietly working as a handyman and farm manager. He kept to himself mostly, except with the kids, who loved him. He wrote letters to his mother every night and stopped drinking entirely. I want to be worth the second chance, he told me once. You already are, I replied. And I meant it. A few weeks later, an email arrived. A private clinic had reviewed my resume and nursing record. They were offering me a position in a patient-centered research program, with tuition coverage if I wanted to continue my education. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone's burden or leftover. I felt seen. The ex-husband? He appealed. Then dropped it when his lawyer withdrew, citing ethical concerns. The last I heard, Jason's assets were being seized by the IRS for unrelated fraud. Poetic. Michael would say the real win wasn't the house or the court ruling, it was what we built after. And I think he's right. We didn't call it a farm at first. It was just a house with a yard, a pond, and too many dreams. But little by little, it began to grow into something more. We started with chickens. Then a goat. Then a stubborn little pig the kids named Justice, because, as Emma put it, he doesn't take crap from anyone. Michael, now in physical therapy full-time, still oversaw everything from the porch at first. But each week, he pushed himself farther. First to the barn. Then to the garden. Then one day, with crutches and shaking arms, he walked, yes, walked, down the path to the pond. We all cried that day. Leo took over most of the daily work. He knew how to fix engines and build fencing, and when he didn't know, he taught himself. He set up an irrigation system for the crops, repaired the old well pump, and managed a schedule for planting. But what shocked me most wasn't his skill, it was his gentleness. He read bedtime stories to my kids. Helped Emma with math. Taught Lucas how to fish. He didn't try to earn forgiveness, he just lived like someone who'd finally found peace. One afternoon, I found him sitting alone by the barn with a letter in his hands. She passed, he said quietly. My mom. Last night. I didn't say anything. Just sat beside him and held his hand until he stopped shaking. After her funeral, he didn't go back to the man he used to be. If anything, he worked harder. More quietly. Like he wanted to honor her by becoming the man she always hoped he'd become. We planted wildflowers along the pond's edge that summer. The children swam every evening, their laughter echoing through the trees like a song we thought we'd forgotten. One night, Michael pulled me aside as fireflies danced above the water. I want to build something permanent here, he said. Not just a farm. A place people can come when they've got nowhere else. A retreat. A real home. You mean like a refuge? I asked. He nodded. Exactly. For people like us. That night we stayed up drawing plans on the back of cereal boxes. A greenhouse. A guest cottage. A counseling space in the old tool shed. Big dreams, too big, maybe, but we believed in them. Because for the first time, we were dreaming out of hope, not fear. And hope, we were learning, is the strongest foundation of all. By autumn, the farm had a name, Harold's Pond Refuge. It felt right, like naming the future after the man who gave us a second chance. We painted a wooden sign and placed it at the gate. Leo built it himself. Michael sealed it with his own hands. Word spread faster than we expected. At first, it was just friends of friends. A woman with 2 kids escaping an abusive marriage. A teen boy from town whose foster placement had fallen through. A former patient of Michael's, now clean, now sober, asking if he could help in the garden just for something to do. We said yes to every story that came with tired eyes and no judgment. We didn't have much, but we had space. Michael, now walking short distances on his own, started leading morning check-ins for the residents. I worked part-time at the clinic, balancing patient care with late-night grant applications. Leo took on the role of operations manager like he was born for it. And the kids? They were thriving. Lucas got his first job helping a neighbor with carpentry. Emma started writing stories and reading them aloud at dinner. The twins, Jonah and Lila, built a lemonade stand that somehow made more money than our entire first crop of vegetables. One evening, after dinner, Lucas pulled me aside. "Mom," he said, "can I use the money I earned to get shoes for the twins? They won't say anything, but theirs are falling apart." I nodded, blinking back tears. "Of course, baby." I didn't have to teach them kindness. They'd lived it. They were becoming the kind of people this world desperately needs. Michael watched them from the porch, his arm around my shoulders, and whispered, "They're going to be okay." I looked at him. "You think we are too?" He smiled. "I think we already are." But life, in its strange poetry, had one more chapter waiting. And it came not through courtrooms or arguments, but through something simpler. Something quieter. A heartbeat. It started with fatigue. Not the usual kind from chasing goats and kids around, or late-night paperwork. This was different. Deeper. A kind of quiet exhaustion that wrapped around my bones and wouldn't let go. I thought it was stress. Or maybe the flu. It wasn't. A month later, I stood in the tiny town clinic, staring at a grainy monitor as the nurse moved the wand over my belly. "There it is," she whispered. A flutter. A flicker. A heartbeat. My hand flew to my mouth, trembling. It had been so long since I'd imagined this possibility. Years of scraped knees, adoption paperwork, food stamps, and then freedom. I never thought life would surprise me like this again. I walked out of the clinic dazed, clutching the ultrasound photo like a secret. Michael was at home, adjusting tomato cages in the garden. He looked up when he saw me, immediately sensing something had changed. "What's wrong?" I didn't speak. Just handed him the photo. He stared at it. Blinked. Then looked at me like I had just handed him the stars. "Are you serious?" His voice cracked. I nodded. "Very." He let out a shaky breath, then laughed, full and loud and completely free. He wrapped his arms around me, stronger now than I ever imagined he'd be again. "We're really doing this," he whispered into my hair. "A new life." The kids didn't know yet. Not officially. But they suspected something. Emma kept watching me when I thought she wasn't. Lucas started making breakfast without being asked. They felt the shift, the way children often do, long before you say it out loud. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the fireflies returned to the pond, we sat as a family, Michael beside me, the kids at our feet, and the house glowing behind us. I placed my hand on my stomach, and suddenly everyone understood. "Are you serious?" Jonah asked, eyes wide. I nodded. And they erupted, laughing, shouting, hugging each other in disbelief. Lucas kissed my cheek. Lila whispered to my belly. Emma cried and asked if she could help pick out the name. The family we had built from pieces and scars and survival was growing again, not just in size, but in love. Later that night, I sat on the edge of our bed, staring out the window at the moonlit pond. Michael came up behind me, resting his hand over mine. "You're not afraid?" I asked. "I am," he said honestly. "But not of this. Not of us. Not anymore." The wind rustled the trees outside. The porch light flickered. Somewhere in the distance, a baby goat cried. And I realized, this wasn't just a second chance. This was the beginning of our real life. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting gold across the pond's surface. The kids were scattered across the yard, Lucas teaching the twins how to skim stones, Emma curled up under a tree with a sketchbook. Laughter danced on the breeze like a song that belonged here. And in the middle of it all, I stood barefoot in the grass, one hand stroking my gently rounded belly. Michael came up behind me, arms wrapping around my waist. He pressed his cheek to my shoulder, and for a long moment, we just stood there, breathing, remembering. This was the home they tried to steal. A house that once smelled like hospital linen and quiet grief now smelled like rosemary and fresh-baked bread. A place that had once felt like a burden was now our sanctuary. We built everything from scratch. Not just the garden or the fencing or the farm's name, but the safety, the love, the family. All of it. And now people came from all over. Women escaping bruises. Teens who aged out of the system. Men learning to forgive themselves. They came with nothing and left with hope. Leo stood by the barn, holding hands with a local woman he met during a feed delivery. She was a mechanic. Tough as nails. She loved him exactly as he was. He never went back to his old life, not once. Not after learning how to be loved in return. Inside the house, on the fridge, hung a certificate, my acceptance into a nursing leadership fellowship. I'd be working fewer shifts and studying more, shaping policies to protect women like me. Women who had to fight just to be heard. Jason? He lost everything. First his lawsuit. Then his firm. Then his name. No one would touch him in business after the forgery scandal and the attempted poisoning came to light. His arrogance collapsed under the weight of his own cruelty. He called once. I let it go to voicemail. The message was nothing but silence. Not even an apology. And that silence? That was closure. Once, I would have wished for his ruin. But now, I just wished him away. Not out of hatred, but out of peace. He no longer had a place in our story. As night fell, I sat by the pond with Michael, our feet touching the cool water. Fireflies blinked above us. The children's laughter still echoed faintly in the background. You think Harold would be proud? I asked softly. Michael nodded. He didn't leave you a house. He left you a future. I leaned into him. We built something real, didn't we? He kissed the side of my face. We're just getting started. Behind us, the porch light flickered on. In the window, I caught our reflection, weathered, smiling, unbreakable. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a beginning I never saw coming.